think we did not. We did A last week, didn't we? 1 Timothy 1.
We did A and B.
A and B both? Okay,
Yeah.
so we're on 1 Timothy 4 and verse 6. And our question was, according to the following passages, what are the responsibilities which the evangelist is charged? So we'll look at 1 Timothy 4 and verse 6. I guess we'll start up front here with Jared and work our way back.
Okay. If you instruct the brethren in these things, you will be a good minister of Jesus Christ, nourished in the words of faith and of the good doctrine which you have carefully followed.
Okay. Paul tells Timothy, first off, what's the first thing he says in that verse? 1 Timothy 4 and 6.
Conditional statement, if you instruct the brethren in these things.
Right, okay, right,
so
Gord.
One of two conditions. Either you instruct the brethren in these things or you don't. And if you do, then the following things are.
Right. Which is saying that we need to be reminded constantly, don't we? Of the dangers of departure from the faith. And Timothy is told there to minister. Minister is used here in the general sense of one being a servant or a minister of Christ. And it's the primary duty, isn't it, of the preacher and teacher to put brethren in remembrance of the Scriptures. That's the duty that Paul charges Timothy with. No other thoughts? So then what about 1 Timothy 4 and verse 12? 1 Timothy 4 and verse 12. Gord, I'll get you to read that.
Let no one despise your youth, but be an example to the believers in word, in conduct, in love, in spirit, in faith, and in purity.
Okay, so what's Paul, how's he encouraging Timothy here?
Well, Timothy was a young person at that time. And people could look at him and say, well, what does he know? He's just a young person.
Right. Paul talked continually in the first few chapters of elders, of older men, didn't he? And you know, sometimes disrespect can be paid to the younger man. First Jared and then Jeff.
Like one of the ways you do not let them despise your youth is you are an example to them.
Right.
Oftentimes youth are immature, inexperienced, and so the older tend to look down on the youth because of that. Whereas Timothy, because he was a minister, an evangelist, was to be an example. He was to not act like a youth in the sense of, and so if you do that, they won't despise your youth. They will see the example of Christ living in you, and then they will respect you for what you teach because because you're teaching the truth.
Right, exactly. Avoid youthful errors. And Jeff?
That reminds us that if we want to teach, teaching is more than just telling people what they need to be doing.
Right.
The teacher looks to himself first, as Jeremy was saying, to make sure that your life is in harmony with things that you're teaching before you teach others.
Exactly. Yeah. That's it, eh? Yeah, so we're reminded then to avoid youthful errors, show maturity, and be an example of what is mentioned. And then chapter 4 and verse 16, Colin, please.
Take heed unto thyself and unto the doctrine. Continue in them, for in doing this thou shalt both save thyself and them that hear thee.
Okay. this I came across a couple thoughts. This has been called the golden text of this letter that Paul writes to Timothy. And we remind ourselves that he wrote this letter to Timothy. Timothy was his son in the faith. Timothy was an evangelist. Paul had groomed him. And so this verse fits perfectly with everything Paul has been saying to Timothy. It's his instruction, and it's his goal to save Timothy and those who heard him, because that was Timothy's job, wasn't it, as a preacher, to teach those, to teach the members. And any other thoughts from anyone before I go on, Jeff?
Shows you that doctrine saves.
Yes.
We often hear that, oh well, don't teach doctrine, teach Jesus, as if doctrine wasn't teaching Jesus. But that doctrine will save. Teaching the doctrine not only will save you, but it will save those who hear you too.
Right.
And so we can. This is one of those passages that teaches us that the gospel of Jesus Christ saves everyone, and we should be teaching everything.
Exactly. I thought we've all entered a saved relationship with God at the moment when we obey the gospel, according to Mark 16 and 15. And then there's also eternal salvation. And that is when we reach that saved relationship in the world to come. But in order for us to get there, I thought of Philippians 2 and 12, that we're to work out our salvation. We must continue to be faithful. And Paul recognized back in 1 Corinthians 9 and 27, and again, it's a verse that's good to remember, those that teach salvation forever, that there's no way we can lose our salvation. But Paul says, "But I buffet my body and bring it into bondage, lest by any means, after that I have preached to others, I myself should be rejected." Paul can lose his salvation. We can all lose our salvation. And that is why Paul uses this thought of buffeting his body, reminding himself continually to be faithful. And that was Timothy's job, was to take people to that final position. Before death, before we leave this world, we have to leave faithfully. We have to have been faithful in order to receive that final relationship with God. And as Paul has pointed out, that's part of your job, Timothy. It's our responsibility also, but it's Timothy's responsibility to remind us of that, to remind us of what is correct in God's eyes. And our last passage then, 1 Timothy 6, 11 and 12. Sandra, I'll get you to read that, please. 1 Timothy 6, verses 11 and 12.
But you, O man of God, do these things and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, gentleness. Fight the good fight of faith, lay hold on eternal life, to which you are also called, and have confessed a good confession in the presence of many witnesses.
Okay, this is a good reminder for all of us, but really Paul was directing this at Timothy. It kind of goes along with the thought of youthful lust. Paul again is reminding Timothy, you have to flee these things. Money, he's telling him, follow righteousness and godliness. I kind of summed it up. This is all strength under control for the preacher. And it's not only a reminder to the preacher, it's a reminder to all of us, because we all look to one another, don't we, for strength and encouragement. Sometimes we can be reminded to look inward. Our conscience can be struck just by another brother or sister saying something or following their example. It's not only the preacher that has to remind us, we can remind one another just by our actions. And so that ends that question. And then, of course, we have, I didn't realize I had all these on, because in 2 Timothy, I'm forcing us to use our Bibles, because it's taken with a couple days of shoveling snow this week. It's just taken too long to put all the verses up. Let's see, what do we got here?
Next one.
There we are. So that's the end of the outline of 1 Timothy. Remember, we had the introduction of the letter, and then Paul's encouragement to Timothy, and the conduct of the church, our responsibilities, the structure, and then, of course, the need for sound doctrine, and then the conclusion of the letter.
I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor